Thank you, Lydia, for your ministry and music, and thank you to you all for coming back this dreary fall evening. It's good to spend some time together in the Word of God and worship together. And tonight we're going to begin with a raise of hands. So by a raise of hands, how many of you have ever been rebuked? How many of you have ever been rebuked, corrected, reprimanded? Pretty many of you. Now raise your hand if you liked it. No hands. I didn't think so. But yet, as you think back over those times, so maybe one instance really comes back to your mind, maybe they kind of all blur together. As you think back over these times of someone telling you that you need to do something differently, or you've sinned and maybe you didn't see it, but they pointed it out to you, they addressed it, they confronted you. These can be very impactful moments. So impactful that maybe as you look back on it, you say, I'm glad that happened. You actually like the fact that that person stepped out and was willing to rebuke you or reprimand you or confront you. These are moments that God uses to bring change to your conduct. Moments that reveal something that you may have been completely blind to. Moments that alter how you're living your life, how you're carrying things out. And we find such a moment for Moses and Israel in our text tonight. So tonight we look at part 2 of this chapter between Moses and his father-in-law. So if you're with us last week, you saw the first half of it, in which Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, comes to Moses. Well, in this second half, Moses is corrected, he is advised, he is counseled by his father-in-law. So our passage for this evening is Exodus 18, chapter 18, verses 13 through 27, and our theme is this: the leadership structure of Israel is adjusted, providing lessons concerning advice given to us and a consideration of the leadership structure of the church. So we get the leadership structure is adjusted. It is altered in our chapter this evening, and there's some lessons, and I'd say there's a lot of lessons that we can learn that I'm going to try and bring out all the way through our message, and then several at the end. So we'll break down our verses, this second half of chapter 18, into 3 sections. We're going to look at counsel needed, we're going to look at counsel given, and then we're going to look at counsel received. So counsel needed, this comes from verses 13 through 18, and we begin with the questions asked by Jethro. If you look with me at verses 13 through 14 of chapter 18, it says this. This is how our second half begins. The next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone? And all the people stand around you from morning till evening." So we see from the start of verse 14 that Moses' father-in-law, he sticks around. Okay, he sticks around to the next day. He brings Moses' wife, his children. They get to talk, as we saw last week. I'm not going to rehash all of that. Now we'll look at that a little bit at the end. But we saw that God was made known to Jethro, and now the next day, Jethro stays around, and he gets to see his son-in-law at work. Okay, he gets to see what he does for the people of Israel, or one of the things that he does. He gets to see what he does and what manner he does it, as again in verse 13 it says, "The next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening." So we have seen, as we think about our study, we have seen Moses in this leadership role doing several different things. We've seen him carrying out different leadership roles among Israel. Now we get to see a new one, and that is as judge. Moses stands to judge the people. And I want to emphasize what we see here. He stands to judge the people all day. Okay, he sits to judge them, or he stands to judge them all day, carrying out this task. And from the rest of the passage, we're going to see this wasn't just a one-off instance. This wasn't just a unique day in Israel, but this was something Moses was continuing doing. He was judging, and he was judging them morning till evening consistently. So this is how Moses was handling things. As we think about Israel as a whole, this was how Israel was handling things as a nation, as Moses judged them. And his father-in-law raises a concern. He says, "What is this that you are doing for the people?" What is this that you are doing for the people? This isn't a question to gain information. He sees what is being done. He gets it. He's not seeking information, but rather this is a question that is raising a problem. Okay, Jethro is raising a problem. What is this that you are doing for the people? And we get a sense for what he sees as an issue. In the second question he asks, he says, "Why do you sit alone? And all the people stand around you from morning till evening." He points out first that Moses is the only one doing this. Okay, Moses is the only one carrying out this task, and he also points out the duration. So he doesn't like the fact that Moses is the only one, but he also doesn't like the fact that Moses is spending so much time on such a task, all the time that he's pouring into Israel in this. And to draw out a lesson for us, okay, as we think about Jethro's position, we find that an outsider's perspective can be really valuable. Okay, Jethro is an outsider. He's not an Israelite. He hasn't been with them this whole time. This is the first time he's seeing this. But notice, right when he sees it, he knows there's a problem. So an outsider's perspective can be really valuable. Okay, though someone, as we think about our lives, doesn't know the ins and outs of everything that's going on, maybe in an organization, a job, even this church, in your family, in your life in particular, issues or concerns may just jump out at them. They might not know the ins and outs or all the history, but immediately issues jump out to them, issues that wouldn't jump out to an insider. Things that those inside grow accustomed to. Okay, it becomes routine. You keep on doing it. Day after day, it's natural. They become blind to it. The outsider notices immediately. Okay, again, it takes one day of Jethro seeing what's going on to raise an issue, to see a problem. So as you think about your own life, okay, we shouldn't ignore the opinions of someone who is new or someone who is around temporarily. We shouldn't ignore others' perspective or thoughts, as they may have a unique eye for something that needs to be paid attention to. So that's Jethro's initial response to Moses' judging the leadership structure of Israel. And now Moses answers. Okay, Moses gives an explanation of what he is doing. It says this in verses 15 through 16. "And Moses said to his father-in-law, 'Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make them know the statutes of God and his laws.'" Okay, so Moses answers Jethro's questions by giving him that information. He offers up an explanation of what is going on by this judging. So first, as we think about Moses' role, how he explains it, first, we find from this phrase that Israel comes to Moses to hear from God, as it says, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God." So Moses is in a mediator role between God and the people in this judgment. Second, as we think about what this judgment is, what does it mean that Moses is judging the people? Moses is deciding right and wrong in fights, as it says this in verse 16. "When they have a dispute," okay, a fight, a conflict, "they come to me and I decide between one person and another." So I want to pause here for a moment. So again, we're told at the start Moses is judging the people. This takes it up a notch. Okay, if you think about just that simple statement, judge, we might not have really known what was going on, but might not have thought too much of it. But now we're told, it says, when they have a dispute. Okay, when they're not agreeing, when they're not seeing eye to eye, they come to Moses to figure it out, to resolve it for him. So the tension, the difficulty, the emotions involved in Moses' tasks can be seen from his explanation here. Moses is dealing with people in conflict. He's deciding who is right and who is wrong. People are coming before him with disagreements. They are struggling with one another. They're upset at one another, and Moses is tasked with resolving it. You can imagine being in Moses' shoes. This is in no way, shape, or form an easy task to have. As you think about what happens when Moses says the one is in the right and the other is in the wrong. How do you think that person that he says, you're in the wrong, you're not doing right, how do you think they're going to feel about Moses? Okay, Moses is working through the details. As you think about someone coming, bringing a dispute, as you think about maybe in your own life, someone coming and they're not seeing eye to eye and they explain all that has taken place. They give you every detail. As you think about it, trying to keep track of all of these details, trying to figure out who is telling the truth, who's not telling the truth, and trying to get all of this, it's an extremely difficult task, and that's what Moses is doing here. Moses is not just using his own wisdom as we think about him showing who's right, who's wrong, but it's God's law that is the basis, as we see from the ending of verse 16. Then Moses judges based off of God's word. As it says in verse 16, when they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make them know the statutes of God and his laws. Okay, so we see what this judging was that Jethro observes. Okay, we see what this judging was. We see that Israel had not only been upset at Moses and Aaron and God as we think through chapters 14, 15, 16, and 17, but now we find there's inner fights. Okay, there's not full peace in Israel among the people. They're not getting along. There's issues that are rising up, which I think is, if we're being real with ourselves, I think we can understand how such things even happen among the people of God. Fights, conflict, tension arises even among God's people. But this judging that Moses was doing, if we put it in our terms today, it's counseling, okay? Counseling between disagreeing parties. They bring their situation to Moses. They share with him what's going on, and Moses shares with them how God views such things. He brings the word of God to them. Moses communicates who is acting in keeping with God and his law and who is not. These are meetings, these are counseling meetings to resolve conflict. The people of Israel were coming to Moses for a counseling appointment. Also, as we think about this judging, what Moses was doing here was an important role. It was a needed role. It wasn't just something that Moses could say, I'm not doing it, okay? I'm done. We're just going to move on. But this was important. He was communicating the word of God and God's decrees. He was representing God in these counseling sessions. So it's important. It's not just a throwaway task, but it's needed. And then also, as we think about this judging, as I've tried to bring out, this is an extremely difficult role, okay? Even in just one case between two people, it was an extremely difficult role. Okay, so just one counseling session can be extremely difficult, extremely wearing, extremely difficult to see who's telling the truth. But Moses is doing this for all of Israel. Not just one, but many. 2 million plus people he is dealing with. Now, some of those are children, so he's not dealing with them, but everyone else. Okay, you can imagine how many fights arose, and there is one person dealing with all of these people and their strife. So Moses is the one dealing with all the hurt, the pain, all the pent-up animosity is brought to him to be resolved. So that's what Moses explains here. He brings out what he's doing, why he's judging, why he's handling this way. He explains the setup, the purpose of this morning through evening job, but this doesn't at all put Jethro's mind at ease. Okay, we're going to see Jethro doesn't just say, okay, Moses, this is an important task. This is a needed task, so just keep on carrying on. You need to keep on going. This is how you've always operated. This needs to be done, so I guess you've just got to keep on going. It's not what Jethro says, but he brings forth the problem that he sees. That's what we get in verses 17 through 18. If you follow along as I read, it says this in Exodus 18, 17 through 18. Moses, his father-in-law, said to him, "What you are doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone." So Jethro, if you think about Jethro's response, he is direct, okay? He is clear. what you are doing is not good. Okay, he doesn't agree with this continuing on. He needs to stop. It shouldn't be. What Jethro is sharing, also I want to bring out, he's direct, but I also want to share or bring out, Jethro's not just bringing out a preference. Okay, he's also not trying to one-up Moses in his leadership style, saying, this is a better way, this is how I do it, so do it this way. But he's pointing out something that he believes will not end well. Jethro is concerned, as we see here in verses 17 through 18. And Jethro explains himself. If you look again at verse 18, it says this, you and the people will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone. Okay, interestingly enough, Jethro includes even the people. Okay, he doesn't just say, Moses, you'll wear yourself out, but he says the people will wear themselves out as well, and we'll consider why this might be in a moment. But what Jethro says will happen is that they will wear themselves out. And this is a good translation of the Hebrew, okay, how the ESV translate it, that they will certainly wear, or he says, certainly wear yourselves out. This is a good translation, and it speaks of, this wearing out speaks of a fading away. Okay, it speaks of a fading away from exhaustion. A crumbling away is the picture. The thought is that over time, as this goes on longer and longer and longer, they'll diminish. Okay, they'll diminish. If this is kept up, they will not be rejuvenated, they won't be refreshed, but eventually burnout is going to take place. All tied up in this phrase that they will wear themselves out. And the picture is of a leaf, okay? Of a leaf, that over time this leaf withers away, crumbles away. Its life, its vitality, it diminishes, and eventually it falls off the tree. That is what Jethro is saying will take place if Moses and Israel continue this way. For Moses, I think if you think about this, I think we can get it. Okay, I think we can understand why this would be for Moses. Okay, a 12-hour plus day, every day, handling heated counseling appointments. Okay, we can see the price that would pay on Moses. But how will the people burn out? Okay, again, it says, you and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out. Okay, how will they be worn out in such a process? There's several ways that we could look at this. It doesn't come right out and say, but it's different than Moses. But eventually, if this continues, if we think about their wearing out, they could sour towards Moses. Okay, all of these people looking to just one man, one person. He tells them no. He tells them they're wrong. They're not in the right. Their opinion could sour towards Moses. And additionally, if we think about their wearing themselves out, they're waiting for Moses to give his declaration. Okay, I don't know if they're waiting in lines or what exactly is going on, but they're waiting for Moses to be able to address their issue that easily could wear on them. Waiting all day to be seen would get old. So they'll wear themselves out, and notice the reason that Jethro says that they'll wear themselves out. He says, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone. Okay, the reason falls back on Moses. Falls back on Moses. This is too much for you, Moses. You may be the leader. You may be called by God. You may be doing okay right now, but this cannot just be done by one person. You need someone else. This load needs to be shared, is what Jethro is trying to get across in what he's saying. So Jethro shows here Moses is not invincible. Okay, he's not almighty, but his ability and his strength will wane over time. For the moment, it works. For the moment, he's able to continue this way, but it won't continue that way. He needs help if he is to continue. This is the problem that Jethro points out here in verses 17 and 18. And I mentioned the outsider earlier. Okay, but also as you think about who Jethro is, there's wisdom here. Okay, there is age here. He's obviously older than Moses. The willingness here we have the willingness here to address problems. Again, not preferences. Again, Jethro is not bringing Moses something that he prefers or something that's trivial, but he brings something that is a real issue that needs to be addressed, something that if it's not handled, it will crash and burn. The fact that Jethro addresses it and addresses it tactfully, kindly, directly, but gently is an example to follow. So I want to bring out application from Jethro's example, an example that can be followed in this church as older and younger come together as the church, as older and younger worship together. The older have the opportunity to be a Jethro to someone younger. Okay, the older have the opportunity to be a Jethro to someone younger, to come alongside them in their walk with God and maybe address a sin that they've noticed. Okay, for an older elder to come alongside a younger elder and address maybe how they need to change, how they're conducting themselves, or how they're responding in a certain situation. For an experienced Sunday school teacher to give advice to a less experienced Sunday school teacher. For one who has fathered children and now has children all out of the house to come alongside a younger father and point out maybe a need that they see that's not being taken care of in their family. The older in this church have the opportunity to be a Jethro to someone younger. We need the older, more experienced, more mature to help the younger, less experienced, less mature in their walk with God and their living their life in general. Okay, that's what we see in this text, and I think in a church such as ours that has older and younger here tonight, and in our church in general, this type of dynamic can, and even I'd say should, take place. And may I just remind us again of Jethro and how he handled this. Okay, he points this out and bring out the manner in which Jethro handles this. He points it out to Moses directly. Okay, so he's clear. He shows he sees a problem, but I would argue he's gentle. Okay, he's not scolding. He's not acting as if Moses is way younger or has no clue what he's doing, but he shows a concern. So we need to follow Jethro in the manner in which he addresses it as well. So address these things at time when you feel it's appropriate, asking God for wisdom, but do it in the manner that Jethro is doing as well. Another application that's going to actually transition us into our second section in which Jethro speaks of the problem that he sees. And Moses, as we think about Moses' response, we're going to see, actually we're not going to see a response from Moses immediately. I want to draw out a point from that. Moses doesn't shoot him down. So Jethro brings this problem, he brings this concern, and Moses doesn't just say, I'm good, I'm going to keep on going the way I am. He also doesn't say, you're out of date. He doesn't say, I'm the leader here, you're not. He doesn't say any of these things to Jethro, but he lets Jethro go on and hears him out in the counsel that he gives. So it's an example to our young people or to anyone who is maybe given a rebuke, given a correction, to hear them out. So when confronted, hear them out, listen to them. As they bring a problem, as they point something out that they think you need to work on, sit quietly during that rebuke. Don't try and defend. Don't try and cut them off. Don't say, I don't need this, and walk away in anger. Rather than walking away offended or acting as if you're above this help, listen to them. Hear them out so that you can decide, is this something that's actually true? Is this something I need to do? Moses is an example here, as we don't have anywhere in this text in between these two sections of Moses interrupting, saying, stop, I'm good. But he lets Jethro go on. And that's where we come to this counsel given in verses 19 through 23. Counsel is given. Jethro goes on. He says the problem. He shows his concern. Now he addresses it with a solution. He gives counsel, advice. And it begins with these words. Jethro says, now obey my voice. Okay, hear my voice. Listen to me. I will give you advice, and God be with you. So we get Jethro's solution, how he thinks this can be fixed. And additionally, Moses' father-in-law, as we can see here, he says, he speaks of God. He speaks of God's favor, as he says, God or he says, God be with you. And later on in verse 23, I don't have it up on the screen, but later in verse 23, he's going to say, if you do this, God will direct you. So Jethro, for some reason, we're not told why, we're not sure why, but he believes God's in this. God will look favorably upon this. This is something that isn't going against God, but is on the same page with God. But the role of Moses is spoken of first in Jethro's solution. Okay, I want to just point out that Jethro doesn't take away all responsibility from Moses, but he adjusts it. He adjusts it. As we see first, Moses still holds a mediator role, as it says in verse 19, now obey my voice, and I will give you advice, and God be with you. And then he says this, you shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. Okay, so in this solution, okay, Moses' role in one sense doesn't change. He's still the one that's interacting with God for the people. He's done this since the call of God on his life. He's done this from the start. He's done this with Pharaoh. He's done this in this chapter. So this mediator role is to continue. Okay, Jethro doesn't take it away from him in this solution. But Moses also holds a teaching role, as it says this in verse 20. So mediator role and a teaching role in this solution. It says, and you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Okay, so Moses' role in this chapter has been one of judge. Cases or conflicts are brought to him, and he is to decide between who is right, who is wrong. He's to bring the law of God to them. And here Jethro speaks of how Moses is to be the one who declares the law, how one should live to all Israel. Moses is to proclaim these things. He's to teach these things to all of Israel, make them known before all of Israel. So it's not just with two people that he's to divulge it in this counseling session, but he's to make it known to all. So Moses the counselor is also to be Moses the preacher in Jethro's solution. So that's the role Jethro gives to Moses, and now he speaks of others. He goes off of Moses, and the big issue of the fact that he's alone, he now addresses. He points to others. As we get the role of others, and we begin by looking at the characteristics that Jethro brings out for who it should be. Okay, the first characteristic is that they were to be someone who is morally upright. If you look at verse 21, it says, moreover, look for able men from all the people. Able men. Okay, that's a word in the Hebrew that can speak of military ability, okay, valor, someone who's good at war. But here, and it can be used this way, it seems to be being used more so to talk about morally worthy. Okay, someone who conducts themselves rightly, someone who conducts themselves well. He goes on, and another characteristic of these people is that they were to be someone who had a reverent submission to God, as he speaks of them as men who fear God. A reverent submission, one who obeys God, one who reveres and respects God. They were to be someone who is reliable, as we get this word trustworthy. Okay, someone who can be counted on, someone who's not lying or deceiving. And then lastly, the last characteristic is that they were to be someone who couldn't be bought, as they were to hate a bribe. So thinking about all of these characteristics, Moses was to have his eyes peeled for men of character. Men who sought to follow God with their lives, men who would uphold justice and the law. And if we think about their culture, okay, it's a culture that valued age. Okay, it wasn't age that Moses was particularly to look for. Not counted out, but not to be the main thing looked for. It wasn't military ability, military leadership that was to be chosen from, but it was a man's uprightness that would qualify him for such a role. Men of character is what Moses was to choose above all else. And then Jethro speaks of the role that they would fulfill, and he first speaks of the group that they would be over. So he speaks of this role, and it says this in verse 21 after he speaks of all these characteristics. It says, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. Okay, so he speaks of the groups that they would be over. They would be over a certain group of people. Not all of Israel as Moses just was, but separating them into groups is what these men would be over. They were to judge as Moses did, as it says in verse 22, and let them judge the people at all times. Okay, so there no longer would just be one counselor among the people of Israel, but there would be many. No longer would everyone look only to Moses. No longer would they have to wait as long as they had for a conflict to be addressed. And then Jethro speaks of their role in relation to Moses. If you look again at verse 22, it says, and let them judge the people at all times. And then he says, every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. Okay, so Moses, still in this mediator role, in this more preaching role, teaching role, he's still handling some of the counseling cases. But it's the ones that are more difficult, more trying, as he speaks of a great matter, while the other men would deal with things that are not as weighty or as tough to decide, maybe more clear-cut to decide. So Moses still has a role in this solution, but some of his work, his counseling work, is delegated. It's given to other men of character, men who fear God. This is Jethro's counsel. Okay, this is his solution, and then we're given this as he rounds out. And that is the outcome. Okay, Jethro gives his guidance, and then he speaks of the outcome. And the first outcome is that Moses will not burn out. As it says this in verses 22 and 23, it comes up twice. And let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. And then he says this, the outcome, so it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will direct you. You will be able to endure. So this would be a shared responsibility. Moses' load would be lightened. This difficult task, this thing that was wearing on Moses, even if he didn't realize it, this thing that he was lifting up all by himself, now had several other men holding it up as well with him. If this is accepted, then Moses will be able to continue on in ministry. Rather than just lasting just a short time, he will be able to last much longer, is what Jethro brings out. Jethro also says that God will be at work in it. As he says, and I've already mentioned this, he says, if you do this, God will direct you. Okay, again, we're not told why this is Jethro's belief, but we do see later in Deuteronomy, and I don't have that text for us, but again, it mentions this this setup, this leadership structure in the beginning of Deuteronomy, showing that it has continued. It is something that God allowed to do, and we don't get any sense that God looked down or looked unfavorably towards it, so God used it. He used this thing that Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought forth. And then the last outcome that is brought out by Jethro is that peace will reign. As it says there at the end, and all this people also will go to their place in peace. Okay, so not completely. All conflict, all tension isn't going to be resolved, but these issues, these potentials that Jethro brought up, if this leadership structure continued, isn't going to happen. They won't wear themselves out in this same way. Peace will reign. So counsel was needed. Okay, it was given, and now we see counsel received. As we close out our passage in verses 24 through 27, they read this way, and I'll read them all one shot. So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And they judged the people at all times. Any hard case they brought to Moses, but any small matter they decided themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went away to his own country. So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law. We shouldn't let that just we shouldn't pass that over as we're reading. That should be something that has some weight to us. Okay, so Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law. Okay, he came along saying, you're not doing what is right, or you're not doing this right, this is going to end badly. Here's what you should do. And we could imagine if you put yourself in Moses' shoes, getting such a rebuke, you can think of, or a correction, I won't call this a rebuke, but if you've been corrected by someone, you can think about how you've responded. Okay, Moses could have thought he had this taken care of, that he had been given a unique ability to carry this load. Burnout happens to some people. It's not going to happen to him. Moses could have not wanted others to be looked to. Okay, pride could have crept in for Moses. He doesn't want to share this leadership. Everyone with their eyes towards him, even though he knows God's the one leading. There could have been a pride aspect that came through. Moses could have thought of his father-in-law's ways as outdated, not useful here, that he was mistaken. But no, Moses takes his advice. He accepts the correction. He applies the guidance. He accepts his inadequacy. He realizes that he is not invincible, and maybe he had learned this. As we think about several weeks ago, up on that hill, with his arms stretched out, being held by Aaron and Hur because he couldn't do it himself, maybe he learned of his weakness there, as it's brought out here yet again. Moses accepts weakness here, and he listens to wise counsel. So may Moses be an example to us in general to obey the counsel of others. Okay, though at first it might rub you the wrong way. Okay, you might think, why did they have to say that? Why did they have to even say it in that way or pull me aside? Okay, you might not like it too much at first, but hear them out. Take some time to let your emotions settle, digest it a bit, think over it, let a few days go by, and consider, is there some truth to this? Okay, are they right? Can I use this counsel that they've given me? And if there is, if they are correct, then do what they said. Be willing to change as Moses is here. He's willing to alter. He's willing to adjust the whole entire structure of what's going on in Israel. A big change for the sake of their health. So 2 items that I want to bring forth as we think about and as we've went through all of this second half now. And the first thing that I want to bring out concerns church leadership. Okay, it relates what we have going on in this text to the church. Okay, there is a real connection, a real relation to what is going on in our text and to the leadership of the church. Jethro takes a one-leader model of leadership and has Moses develop other leaders. Moses still has a role different from the rest. He represents God. He takes on greater matters. He teaches the law of Israel. We could relate Moses' role to a senior pastor. Okay, a senior pastor stands in a unique role. A senior pastor of a church communicates the word of God to all the people, not just to one or not just to some. Moses' impact was still on all the people as the senior pastor's is. But what we see here is that Moses also had other leaders as well who handled the conflicts, the difficulties of the people they were placed over. So too, as we think about the church, I am not the only leader. Pastor Reed was not the only leader of this church before me. The senior pastor is not the only leader, but there's a plurality of leaders in the church. The senior pastor is one among many. In the New Testament, this isn't just our structure as a church. This isn't just something that we thought was nice, but this is what the New Testament calls for. And if you're in Barry Hostetter's class, this might sound familiar to you, and I believe he's taught on this passage already, but Titus. Chapter 1, and we'll start with verse 5, but I'll move on. It's one place we see this. It says this is why I left you in Crete. So it's Paul talking to Titus, so that you might put what remained in order and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. That is elders, plural. Plural, not just one elder, is he talking about, not just setting up one elder in the church, but multiple elders, more than one. Titus was not to serve as the elder for all the churches in Crete, but multiple men were to be raised up, appointed to serve as leaders in each of the churches in Crete. Okay, and I'm going to continue reading on in just a moment, but I do want to point out another connection that we see to our passage, not just multiple leaders, but the same things going on in Exodus 18 as we see here in Titus with elders. They're to be men of character. And we even see some connections that I'll bring out in just a moment, but look at what is to be looked for in an elder, in a leader of the church. It says, if anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife and his children are believers and not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination. For an overseer as God's steward must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain, but hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine and also to rebuke those who contradict it. So we can connect able men, morally worthy, to this phrase, above reproach. Okay, something can't be brought against this man, that he's in the wrong, or something that he's continuing to do habitually and ignoring as a sin. We can connect fear of God to holding firm to the trustworthy word as taught. We can connect trustworthy and hating a bribe to the lover of good. Moses was to look for men of godly character, and so was Titus. So are elders in the church. The leaders are to be plural, and also men who are living according to God and his word. So as you think about our church, we follow this biblical structure. Again, it's not just me. I may be up front, the one preaching, but there are other leaders as well. There are other leaders that are carrying the load of this church. You could flip over your bulletin and look at them and see our elders. We share the load as elders that oversee, or as our elders oversee committees of the church. I don't lead every committee. I'm not even at every committee meeting. Our elders meet monthly to consider the work and speak up. All have an equal vote, make decisions together. So just as Israel was led by multiple leaders, so too the church is to be. It's a model that guards from burnout, as our text brought forth. It's a shared leadership structure. Moses still held a unique position of leadership, just as a senior pastor does, but there were other leaders serving and counseling and meeting the needs of the people along with him. Second thing I want to bring out, different point, but it's thinking of all of chapter 18 together, and it's this. As we think about chapter 18, how it fits into the whole, when Moses was teaching the people, what he was bringing forth, what was the basis of his judgment, his teaching, was not his thoughts, his opinions, his judgment, but it was God's judgment, God's law. And we see, as we think about this chapter, we're going to see that this second half ushers us into the rest of the book, and more so into the next couple of chapters that bring forth the law of God. But what has come before? If we think about 17 and a half chapters before, we could say were gospel. It was speaking of God's deliverance of the people of Israel. We saw last week how this was made known to someone who didn't belong to Israel, Moses, his father-in-law. He learned of God's deliverance, and he declared God as greater than all gods. The chapters before this one spoke of how God rescued his people, and tonight's passage begins to turn us to how he wants his people to live. God has caused them to be his people. It is based off of his work, his salvation, but he wants his people to live in a certain way. He has particulars for how they're to conduct themselves, and we see that in the next couple of chapters. So Exodus has begun with gospel, turns to law. We can't forget about God's salvation. We can't forget about the basis of what or for why we are living the way we are. We can't confuse the two, thinking that following the law brings the gospel, but we have been saved by grace to live in a particular way. We have been rescued from our sin by the work of God so that we can live a life apart from sin, and that is what the next couple of chapters are going to talk about. That is what this half ushers us into as we consider the law. The law shows us how. So just to preview our passage for next week, it says this. We see both aspects, God's deliverance and his law. It says, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be a treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine." Let's close in prayer. Lord, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for such a text that there are many things that we can glean from it. There are many things that we can learn and even be challenged to apply to our lives. Lord, I want to start by just thanking you for our elders. We thank you for raising up among us godly men, for raising up men who care about you, who love you, and who care about your church. Lord, I thank you for the elders that we have, and Lord, I especially thank you for the way in which we can serve together, the way in which they allow it so that there's not just one person serving, but Lord, I thank you for each of the men that serve on the elder board, for the way in which they carry certain responsibilities. They even have informal conversations that maybe no one knows about as they help people through conflict, as they encourage people, as they watch out for the spiritual well-being of our church. Lord, I thank you for the men that you have rose up to share in this leadership role. Lord, I also thank you for the way in which this text brings out just this dynamic of bringing correction, bringing even rebuke at times, seeing an issue, seeing a sin, and addressing it. And Lord, I pray that within this church, that the older, the more experienced, the more mature would be willing to speak into the lives of those who are younger, less experienced, less mature. Lord, help them to do this in a gentle way, to know how to say it in a way that isn't going to rub people the wrong way, even if it catches them off guard, that it's seen in a loving way. But Lord, I pray that we would help each other out, that we would share our experiences, that we would be willing to share how we've failed and help other people so that they don't, or just to relate to them and show them how we work through these things. Lord, I pray that the younger, the less experienced, the less mature would be willing to receive these things, that they would want to learn from the older, that they'd want to talk and even ask questions concerning their failures or concerning their sin to those that are older, those who have wisdom. Lord, I pray that we would have this dynamic that Jethro and Moses had in this text. Lord, we thank you for such a text. There's many things to pull out, and Lord, I pray that we would walk away applying them to our lives tonight. We thank you so much for being a God who's delivered us, rescued us, and has called us to be your children. And in your name I pray. Amen. Thank you for joining us this evening, and you are dismissed.